We're going to skip all the housekeeping and Ricardo, take it away.
Okay, this is our evening session. Welcome to New York City. It's 8:30 at night, and I thought I was going to have the evening free, but it looks like we're doing a graduate with Bob tonight. Hooray, hooray, hooray. Thank you so much, guys, for your patience, and thanks for jumping on. So we're working with like the greatest technique of them all, which is graduation. Definitely a favorite of mine. And sort of graduation, I'm just going to jump right into the lesson here. So graduation is the only technique to which you are able to build. And it does that by using shorter pieces of hair and allowing the top to slowly get longer. And once all those sections of hair end up stacking up, what ends up happening is you end up creating a shape, or a shape that ends up being fuller on top. And so we refer to this technique as being graduation, and graduation is truly architecture and haircutting, because whereas one length takes the natural fall and the natural contours and outline of the hair, what graduation does is it tends to work with those shorter pieces, helping to build, right? Whereas layering, what it does is it ends up removing weight through the top and kind of builds in the opposite way. So I always look at layering as more of like a deconstructor to create more movement. And really, graduation's about architecture and hair and building up shapes and contours, okay? So graduation is also great, even though you're building up weight, it's also great as a way of controlling thick hair. So sometimes when you remove weight on thick hair, what it does is it has the ability to sort of expand and become unruly. So graduation is another great technique to sort of help build up weight through the top area, which helps to maintain sort of flatness as well, okay? So some reasons why you'd want to use graduation: obvious ones, you know, the hair being finer, the hair being thicker, and you want to control it. And then, of course, lack of head shape. So sometimes, you know, the head tends to be flatter in specific areas. And when we tend to hold our fingers on a certain angle, in accordance with the head shape, what we tend to do is we end up building those shapes, and it creates a much more sort of flattering and suitable look, okay? So we're going to be doing a sort of classic graduated bob, but the way I've sort of taken my sections here, it's going to allow me to, one, take it up quite short. It allows me to kind of think about all the different transition points as we go through the cut. So, you know, a lot of times with graduated bobs, I may just like start in the bottom and work up through the sides and not actually have any sectioning. But actually, for the purpose of today, this is great because it sort of, it puts in those sort of key parts where you're having to think about the transition of what's going to happen with the sectionings in certain areas. So here, what you're going to see me doing is I'm going to start off vertical, then I'm going to pivot up to a diagonal section. And the important thing is what's happening with those sections is it's changing the way the weight gets distributed. And once we get to this point then becomes really important in terms of understanding the relationship between this panel and this panel in order to create an outline. So I love sort of sectioning it off like this because it helps to kind of like give you those like key points. So like, right, I need to start over directing back. I need to think about my elevation, and I need to maintain my section angle as I go through this area, okay? So what we have through the top, I actually did one earlier today where I had one that I had already previously had cut a fringe on it from last week's class. So I added a bang. And this evening, what I wanted to do is I wanted to do a really classic one with kind of like a slightly modern outline, but really work with like a side parting that really just sort of sits on the jaw. So this is going to be sort of more, you know, true to that 60s, even 20s kind of graduated bob, okay? So we've just split it through the center there. Then we've got these two diagonal sections, and then these two sections through the back really just sit at a point at the apex and then descend down, okay? And then through the top area, the whole section plan helps you kind of transition from the graduation into the bob, and then allows you to control the outline based off of that, right? I'm gonna jump right in, and then you guys can ask questions. Okay. She's already dried while we were waiting. All right. So I'm going to start on this side. And I think the most important thing that I want you guys sort of take back from this is to think about how and why you use certain sections, right? So, 90% of the time when you end up doing a haircut, you'll start something with like some kind of vertical section in the center back, and then you'll either pivot. Normally, when you end up creating bobs, you end up using horizontal sections. And of course, there's variations on both of those. But to understand kind of like what the sections actually does. So in a really simple way of thinking of it, a vertical section is like a ladder in a haircut. It immediately allows you to work upwards and downs no matter where it's placed. So in terms of its efficiency, it works really well working upwards and downwards. And what that means for one of the techniques you use, like graduation or layering, is it immediately, because of the height of the section, it immediately takes the shape of the head and it takes whatever existing weight is in this section and it minimizes that without building too much. Okay? Horizontal sections, when you're working in a haircut, whether you're starting on top or on the bottom, because of the use of a guideline, the way we cut hair, the way we naturally transition from one section to the other, horizontal sections are said to have built up more weight for a reason. Because of the way they travel up the head, they go slower, so it acts more like a series of steps. And so for that reason alone, graduation ends up building more weight than a vertical section will, okay? So horizontal sections are really efficient from side to side, but they're not that efficient as they work up the head. And vertical sections are really efficient working upwards and downwards, but they're not very efficient when you work from side to side. Hence why when you cut at one length, you end up using horizontal sections because it's more important to get your outline straight than to finish the haircut very quickly. Whereas when you look at layering, vertical sections help to, again, take weight away and they help for things to move and also to blend. Now, the one section that lives in between those are the diagonal. And the diagonal is kind of like the most beautiful section because it can take characteristics of both the horizontal and the vertical depending on where it's being cut and how it sits. So really, when you think about a diagonal section, the weight always follows the angle of the section. So why do we always want to cut horizontal or vertical rather than thinking of the diagonal? The diagonal is truly like the most beautiful section because even when you look at the contours of the face, the neck, the ears, everything is on a diagonal, so it naturally descends down. So classically, you want to mix all three of the sections in order to use, all the abilities that you have in order to build the right kind of weight. So horizontals will end up giving a much fuller and heavier weight buildup, and vertical sections will flatten that out. For me, I think, I like using a vertical to start, but I prefer to move to a steeper diagonal and then use those steeper diagonals as a way of making the shape look a little bit more modern. Not that it makes it really dog-ear or too high up through the back. It just kind of sets this, that graduation perfectly in this place to balance out at the front. So when you think about how short or long to start with your graduation, there's a couple key places, and you can do this much longer, but there's a couple key places when you're cutting length at the occipital bone, where it sits, ends up creating an outline through the front. So the occipital bone, because it's the higher point of the head, is the most important to look at when we're looking at how we're going to balance out the length through the front. So aesthetically, when something ends up becoming too short in the back area and too long in the front, it feels like it's going to drop. It looks like it's what I call like a tipping point. The line itself looks too long in that front area and too exaggerated in the back. So one of the things you got to pay attention to, especially with graduated bobs, is making sure that your tipping point isn't too exaggerated, okay? So we're going to start in the back. All right, now you could start on any side here. All right, I'm going to just start on this side since we're already, in this place. Okay, so I'm going to take that very first section, okay, as a vertical section. We're going to just keep the head just slightly forward as we do this, which is just going to help to exaggerate that line. And when we cut this, okay, I'm going to go a little shorter. I got to keep in mind that the length that's being cut right through here is now helping to decide what's going to happen through the sides here. Okay, so I'm going to choose this. It's about, I don't know, about 2 inches there. And then we're going to get to the bottom. And what we're going to do is we're going to try to angle our fingers in as tight as we can based off of that angle. Now, one of the things that helps with that angle is the way we end up closing our hand off. This is what I call like a hair cutter's fist here, okay? It helps to strengthen the tension in your hand by closing off this way. When we start to open up, it actually changes the angle and it actually changes the way you're able to hold that hair, okay? So another key thing now is as we take the next section, in order to get a really sort of beautiful descension from that point in the occipital bone to go all the way to the front, instead of just taking the sections vertically and over directing to the previous, what tends to happen is it knocks out too much weight. And when we end up using these guys, and normally we want to take these closer to a horizontal to help to build up that bob shape. If these guys have no weight in them and no strength, especially at the very end, when we end up taking these sections on top, they end up becoming too heavy and they form a weight line on top of something that's too light. So you want to get to a point where you start to build weight and contour right at the back part of the ear here, so that when these sections come down, you start to literally feel like you're cutting the bob portion of your graduated bob. Okay, we'll play on words there. All right, so we're going to take our second section now. Okay, so I'm keeping the head slightly down and off to the side. And so when you do this with your clients, you literally, you go down and then you just push it just slightly off to the side. What that does is imagine there's, a back and a shoulder that comes out here. When we come in on this palm to palm position, it's really tight. And so what you have to do is try to move a little bit more on a diagonal. You'll find it a little easier. And by putting the head a little bit off to the side, it just creates that space. Okay? So as I take each section, excuse me, as I take each section, I'm just going to be really mindful that I'm just pivoting off that first spot. Okay. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to over direct that back to my previously cut section here. All right. We'll check for our guide. So really important as well when you do this, you've got to cut like on the guide. Otherwise, that's also going to be stuff that you're going to have to clean up after. Okay. I almost sometimes think that when I'm cutting it, I'll almost like clean up the section that I'm working on as I cut. So there's always a slight refining happening. Okay. So now I'm allowing my section to become even more diagonal. Okay. I'm now at the corner. Let's see if I can move you guys in a little closer. Okay. So I'm now literally right at the corner of the hairline. And again, this one is just going to come back to the previous as well. Okay. Now, an important thing at this point as well is that people will want to do something like that where they'll come underneath and they'll scoop that hair up, get really great tension, and then cut. And I'm not going to do that because to me, the minute you scoop that up, you're literally dragging or over directing that section slightly forward. And that to me is how you end up creating a hole. Okay, so we're not going to do that, and we're going to just constantly comb our section back to our guide. If we need more tension, we'll strengthen our hand position and add a little bit of water to the hair as well. Okay, so right now, as I see this, I'm looking for that contour, and an important area to pay attention to right now is this guy right here. Now, on the mannequin, it's literally the hair is sewn in, but on a person, you kind of have that sort of the hole would literally start right there. So a little tip for those of you who hate having the hole, I like a little bit of a hole because it gives me the ability to curve the line up. And essentially when you're doing a graduated bob, you know, the classic ones from like the 20s, they had a gigantic hole like underneath the ear. So I want to do one that's got more of like a curve to it. And I'd love for you guys to kind of not look at the hole as being such an evil sort of thing. But if you don't want to get the hole, an important thing to think about is that it's not just about over directing to this spot or even coming further back. Really, there's a place right here at the back part of the hairline. Okay. And what you have to think about is all these sections through the front here are going to start to get over directed back to this point right through here, which represents the outline through the sides. Okay, so when we start to move into these sections, really important, you'll start to see me taking those sections and extending that part, but you have to kind of get it set up with these guys through here. So in those last sections, I'll do one more, and then I'm going to do a couple on the other side. And on these last sections, you literally start to just over direct that section and start to fill in the hole by extending the line. So it's like that section, you start off the same way through here, but now as we come down into this area through here, what we want to do is to lift that section and then just pull it back ever so slightly. So you're helping, you know, that length to sort of get set up in order to continue the outline. Okay. Now, before I finish this whole one side, what I'm going to do is, and I'm normally in a salon, I would go back and forth, cut one side, then cut a couple sections on the other side. Okay. And what I do find can sometimes be a problem is I like to save that last section on this side specifically, just as a sort of precaution. As I cut this other side, right, I'm going to use that last little bit of hair to make sure that I'm balanced out perfectly in that area. So before we finish that, I'm now going to jump on the other side. Let's see if we get some clarity with our zoom. Getting foggy in here, guys. All right, there we go. Okay. I'm now going to start on this side here. Okay. And now you'll see my hand position is going to switch. And now I'm going to be palm to palm here. And it almost feels like your knuckles are sort of resting at the bottom part of the neck here. Okay. It really depends on how big your hand is, really. Okay. So each time I do one, I'm just going to be really mindful that each section is just coming back to the previous. And graduation is all about consistency, right? So if I start combing from underneath or combing two ways, this way, one way, that way, the hair is going to remember and it's going to start to shift. This is like laying tile work now. And so if one tile or brick is out of place, it literally sends the signal as a guide to the next one, and everything just repeats and mirrors that process. So each section that we're taking right now, we're being really mindful just to do the exact same thing. So I'm not trying to change up the system, okay? Now we're going to come in. Okay, great. And we'll finish these last sections up here. And then as I do this, okay, try to be really aware. You can't really see where I'm standing here. But as I start to approach this corner, it's like you want to take your body and you want to start to shift your body slightly back. You want to keep that hand that's in that area. Do not try to now start to really stand in the side. What you want to do is now start to almost like create a straighter body position so that you're pulling this area back. We've got a great class when things get back to normal. It's a class called cord cutting, and we teach some really great body positions that really help you to control, you know, your balance from side to side. Okay? So once I've completed this little section through here, I'm just going to take a touch off that. Okay? So once I've completed that little section through here, okay, I'm now going to come back through on the opposite side and finish my last remaining section. Oops, I still had another one in there. My fault. Let's finish that last section, and then we'll come back on the opposite side, okay? And at this point, it's almost like the minute you get to like the corner of the hairline, you can kind of think, you know, it's like 2 to 1, 3 to 2, 4 to 3. And then once you get to number 3 right here, 4 and 5 are just coming back to that third section at the round of the head. That's really what we have, what it's looking like right now. Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead, jump on the other side, and we'll finish this last section here. Okay. Any questions, Kyle?
Not yet, but I'm assuming that's because we didn't go through my fantastic housekeeping and nobody knows how to ask. If you guys do have questions for Ricardo, feel free to put them in the Q&A box, and I will be happy to interrupt him. It's one of my favorite things to do, and ask him your questions.
So, okay, good. Now, when we cross-check, this is the one time where you can now just start to comb. So I'm just checking my shape here, making sure that I got a nice sort of dissension coming down, all right? And now, as we come through, we're just gonna take the sections the opposite way. Now you can take your comb it from underneath, lift that, and you should kind of start to see almost like a sort of like triangle from a bird's eye view. So it's not exactly a wall. It's got a diagonal shape to it. And as you cut, you should really, again, look for a slightly longer point and a shorter point, and anything that lives in between would be considered weight. Now, if something really pops out and you're like, wow, that's a lot of length, this is the worst way to cut it, okay? So you wanna just use this as a way to perfect rather than correct, okay? And now the lifting happens because essentially what it's doing is it's removing small amounts of weight, which I didn't want to have that happen when I'm initially cutting, you know. So think about how the lifting can change that. And now as we come on the opposite side, we're just going to again take a diagonal this way, and then our hands can come in like so, and it's the same idea. Okay. And always just a good tip again is to pull to the end of the shape. It took me so long to understand that. You know, a lot of times when you cross check, you might be pulling it to the wrong space or where you didn't actually cut it. Okay? So think about that. I spent a lot of my years, actually when I first started teaching, I wouldn't really cross check. And mainly because I just felt that, you know, you could pretty much get everything from the initial kind of execution when you do it. Okay, and I just found that I ended up screwing my work more up when I cross-checked and tried to fix things. So just keep that in mind as well. Okay.
Hey, Ricardo?
Yep.
Are you holding the hair at an angle or horizontally?
Right now, horizontally, 90, straight out.
Perfect.
Okay. So sometimes what happens with graduated bobs is as we start to get into these areas, all kinds of stuff happens. Okay? Now, again, with the way we've sectioned it, we can kind of approach it a lot of different ways. We can come back in vertically this way. That would take the graduation up really, really short at the back part of the head. Okay? What's happening now is we're kind of getting ourselves set up, one, to start to build up some weight and start to provide some length right in this area for our outline as we move into the sides. Okay? The other thing that's now starts to happen is the blending that happens in the back area. So now as we start to move up the head, we're kind of going to start to take our sections on these diagonals like so until we move to our last diagonal through here. And so this just helps to make sure that as we take the sections, it's going to kind of move them to a slightly steeper diagonal to make sure as we go forward, we don't end up building too much weight. Okay. So now as I progress here, what's going to happen is my sections, especially through the back, I need to start in the back area. The section needs to come out. I need to be very aware if I'm lifting or if I'm bringing that section down. If I'm bringing that section down because I need to now gain length, I'm in a very tricky place here because this essentially is like a stationary guide, right? And so you're kind of like trying to bring everything to the same spot without actually building a weight line, which can be really tricky. So as you do this, be kind of mindful that the other place that you can stretch that hair is further out this way. So as you come down, you also want to come out, down, and then out, down, and then out. So you're extending where the hair is being cut and the place that's being cut so that when it stacks, it's got more room for the hair to blend it. If you bring it all very close to the scalp, you're giving the hair no room in order to sort of breathe, so the weight lines really build up there, okay? So now as we start to progress into the sides, I gotta be really mindful, again, of these pieces that I'm always extending them in order to continue to gain some length as we move through the sides. So as I cut here, I'm elevating my section back, I'm over-directing slightly back as well, and now what I wanna do is as I cut, I wanna make sure that I'm always keeping in mind that little piece right through there that I'm helping to, again, stretch and continue to get that line. Now I'm gonna get a little bit of a hole here, but again, like I said earlier, I'm gonna use that as a way, you know, when we look at the back here, you can almost see there's already like a point here. So there's this great way of using the existing hairline and then you just kind of round through the line. So it looks more modern. And if you guys know, I'm like a Japanimation kind of fan, and I love grad bobs because they're always in cool science fiction films as much as they're in, you know, classic 1920s silent films. So I love that. You know, this is truly a classic haircut that'll definitely be with us, I think, our entire time. It's going to live through the coronavirus. Okay. So another little tip here is if you can avoid, you know, picking and dropping the hair, it helps to keep it really fluid as you do this. I'm applying lots of tension to this as I cut it, okay? And we had some great questions earlier about curly hair. And I love graduated bobs for shapes, period, on curly hair because they're really easy to cut. You can kind of, you know, just hold the hair with a lot of tension and, you know, really get a great result. All right, so we're just gonna take some of the curl out of here with a bit of water. Okay. She does have a little bit of texture, so before I blow dry it out, we'll just shake it so you can kind of see the textured version here. All right. So now, as we progress into the sides, okay, as you can see, we're just going to move our sections in that way. We're going to be really mindful that we're still have hair to cut in the back before we transition into these sides. Okay. And here we're really able to control the length. Now it's being cut here. Okay. Just turn the chair so you guys can see how these guys get pulled So they're not just flat against the head, actually slightly back and out. Yep.
Do you ever cut the perimeter first before you start graduating the hair?
Great question. We had that earlier today. Great question. You totally can. I'll be honest with you. I find that I don't, and it could just because I'm like lazier that way, and I feel like that would just be like twice the amount of work. But you absolutely can cut the shape first and then go back in and graduate. And if it's more like, if the reason to do that is more about controlling like certain aspects of like the length, maybe your client's like, hey, I need this to be like exactly this length, then absolutely you can even just go in, you know, and do like half of the perimeter and then go back in. You know, and you also could find it more confusing when you do it like that, because, you know, when you are graduating, like right now, what's going to happen is the outline gets put in after, and it means that I end up cutting some of the graduation that I'm actually creating right now. I end up cutting some of that away. Okay, and so, you know, a good thing to think about is when the outline's there, blending to the outline can become a little tricky, and sometimes you find you end up cutting the outline away only to having to go back through and do it again. But absolutely, you can totally do that. I look at everything that I learn and I kind of take it and just kind of experiment and look to see what works, you know. So it's like I may be already doing something similar to this, and then I would just put the sectioning plan, you know, and a lot of times when I just adjust like slightly. So as I come into it, I'm kind of looking to see what the results of what I'm doing is actually giving me.
Hey, Ricardo.
Yep.
How would you adjust this cut for a guest with extremely thick hair?
So you would just really keep your elevation much lower, right? So in fact, you don't want to create a short grad bob for someone with really thick hair. Graduation's an excellent choice for what you're asking, because it does help to get like, so if it's a bob, it's going to get rid of the triangle and round the edges through. It helps to take whatever weight. So imagine it's all sitting in this one area, and it helps to shift that weight and round it so it sort of spreads it out, which then allows you that when you do texturize it again, it impacts it even more, makes it flatter. So the thing to do is try not to use vertical sections. I would go almost like more diagonal and kind of chevron, you know, almost like the same technique that we're doing right here and how we're breaking that up. I would almost start my first section there, hold that section down, and then just immediately start to use more of, you know, that horizontal diagonal to help build weight that you're able to control rather than remove it in this area and then build it where the head's really going to protrude. So, but definitely a good choice. So when I'm cutting this side, one of the things I also have to be mindful of is if I kind of need to go back a section or two, okay, so that I'm picking up the same guidelines that I did on the other side. So that's really important as well. And probably the worst thing about what I'm doing right now, working one side then the other, is the way the sections can end up sitting differently. So also another good reason to have these kind of in there, because they really do help to make sure that when you do get to that point, you're essentially using the same sections on both sides of the head. Okay.
Ricardo,
yep.
Are you, is the entire haircut over directed back?
The whole haircut's being over directed back, yes. Okay. It's like not exactly stationary. So you kind of have to visualize there's like a triangle that sits through here. And so we end up building up to that triangle, and then we have about this much space where the bob gets built in order to blend the two areas. So as we're stacking the hair, it's not just being brought to a singular spot, that spot grows with more length. So it's like if you looked at it from a bird's eye view, imagine you saw like one little room that was like a triangle. The next room that sits on top of it would be slightly wider, and the one after that would get wider, and the one after that gets wider. So you're looking at a really small, you know, triangular shape to start with, and then it gets wider and wider and wider. So each time from a bird's eye view, right, we're seeing this triangle get built as I move through the sides. And it starts off quite small, and then it gets larger because we end up pulling more length to fill in this space here. You could like talk about grad bobs for like forever. I think when we learn them like just like a one length cut. And then when you start to study them, you're like, whoa, there's like a lot of stuff that's happening, you know, that makes it so interesting and so adaptable for different heads. Right? So I've got to constantly go back, right? And this haircut always kicks my ass. So I still have to go back and make sure I'm checking both sides as I move on. Okay, so if there's ever one haircut that you literally want to stop and check as you're cutting, definitely a graduated bob. Okay? And then always being mindful that as you start to approach the sides, that the back still needs to be cut. And that as you start to work in through these areas, that you're starting to lift and start to extend the shape in that area. You can actually see the triangle coming out there, okay? And then we just keep building. Let's see if I can hold that, that's kind of cool. Keep building off that. I think that the mistake that when people are like, damn, it didn't work. It's not, it didn't work. It could be inconsistency from side to side. I find that the one thing that when it like goes wrong, you should just stop and then just readjust the sections that you're using. Too much weight, you know, tend to take them steeper or more diagonal. Not enough weight, then obviously you're going to start to take them more, you know, closer to a horizontal. So you're constantly just like cooking with it, you know. Kind of taste it or put your fingers in there to check for the temperature. You guys can see it's almost dinner time for me. Okay. So again, we're extending as we work down to the sides here. Okay. And it's good to, I think maybe some of the, if there's any institute students on here, you guys might relate to like, you know, the experience of having done a bad one, that you have like this, it's like, it almost like makes you sweat, and then you're going to do a graduated bob. You're like, oh no, I know that weight line's going to come back in. I know I'm going to screw this one up. And so it's really important to kind of, you know, get a handle of your techniques and control them, because you don't want to have those feelings around certain haircuts, especially because they come from your training. So they kind of, you know, they have these memories for you. Okay. At least they do for me. Right. Just going to pop the head so that not too much off to the side. Okay. Just get some cool texture. Okay. So this is our shape as of right now. Got some length. Probably remove some of that, but we'll see once we finish here. Okay. So now we've gone through, we've done both sides, and now when we go through the top, now that essentially we have an outline established on both sides, okay, instead of coming into the top like so, we now take our sections like so, coming up diagonally this way into the hairline now. So let's just start on this side, and I'm going to work up until that side parting, and then I'll do the other side.
Hey, Ricardo.
Yep.
Does tilting the client's head forward change the outcome of the haircut?
It's not going to change it so drastically. I mean, does it change the angle of it? It adds to it for sure. Do I do all my haircuts with the head upright? Like never. So to me, the head needs to just move a little bit off to the side so I can see, or a little bit forward so I can see. I personally have never found that it was like, oh my God, you destroyed my haircut because your head was too off to the side. The most important thing for me is I got to see what I'm doing. Right? So it's not like she's like all the way down there. So it's just like taking the head and coming off to the side this way and watching that angle come off the head. Okay. So now we're going to come up through the top area. Okay. This is really the easy part, because essentially all we have to do is now just bring these sections down to our bob. Okay. So we follow that same cutting line all the way to the front. Okay. I did do one this morning. Maybe I'll pop it over here when we're done so you guys can see, but we did one with a bang. It's cool. Okay. And so again, these guys, they're coming back and out. Okay. When you over direct sections like that, you do not want to pull them too far back, otherwise they'll end up sitting in another room. Okay, so I'm just going to go through that as well and just make sure, because I have also brought them a little further back than I needed. You don't need it all. Okay, so it's going to save us some stuff to cut when it's dry. All right. And now we're going to go through and do the other side. And I think we're good for time, because did I buy myself an extra half hour there or what, Kyle?
You are speeding. You're going quick.
Okay, good.
Actually, we have about 45 minutes still.
Okay. So not that much time. Okay, so now we're going to come on the other side, and I'm going to literally take my sections all the way from the back into the front here. Okay. Just comb that away. Push again, just slightly down. Okay. And then loads of tension as I cut this. All right. And at this point, I'm just following the same line. I think these are the really popular shapes when we get back into the real world. I think we'll have some really precise haircuts coming out. Not too far back. And she's got quite a deep side parting. All right, so that'll be fun.
Ricardo, do you remember, I know those shears are quite old. Do you know if Sassoon still makes them?
I don't think so. You can always find like contraband kind of stuff, you know what I mean? I think, I know Hairbrand at one point was selling a pair. Yeah.
And
I used to give them away to my favorite students.
There you go. And I mean, you still use your Hikaris and your Van Michaels shears too.
Yeah. I got I'll have to do what's in my kit.
I think people would love that.
Okay. So this is like way longer than I need to, but I've put in a really deep side parting here, okay? And I'm just gonna pull it to where it needs to go. I'm not gonna change any of that. I'm gonna just make sure it connects with my graduation in the back, okay? And I'm not gonna worry about that length as of yet. Let's go through and just make sure I haven't left anything on the other side. Okay. Just 2-3 hairs here. Just make sure we're golden here. Now, last thing, I've got one here on the other side still. Okay. So through the parting, what needs to happen, because if we comb our lady back, she's gonna have overhang, right? So what we're gonna do is we're gonna go right through the parting, okay? And we're gonna make sure that we check both sides in at this point. So we're gonna now be pulling everything back, all right? Otherwise, you end up sitting in front of me on the subway, and I notice the bit that has been left out the back. So important is that if all this hair comes back, which it should totally be able to do, we shouldn't get any overhang in the cut, okay? Which is why, even with the side parting, you want to make sure, she's got a little knot in here. You want to make sure that nothing lives outside of the shape. So if there's any pieces to cut, you bring them all the way back at a very low elevation in order to check that area in. Otherwise, she'll have bits and it'll be tricky for them to understand where those pieces actually go. Okay? So let's just dry it. A little shake. Okay. Here's our sort of textured version as of right now. Okay. And the other side as well. Okay, so now I'm gonna blow dry this. And again, you could go now into this and like just twist cut. And if you use some of the curly techniques that we did in our curly class, you could also just help to refine this one. Okay, so I'm gonna be using the speed of lights to quickly blow dry our mannequin. Love this. I also put in a little smooth infusion spout prep to start with. And then I'm going to be using a Denman brush to blow dry. These are a little bit different. They're called vest brushes, but they're like the Denman brothers' best friend or brother. And so the idea here is as we're blow drying, we're going to take this hair here and we're going to wrap it using the head as our molding surface like so. And it really makes the hair hug the head as we do it, okay? We're lucky and fortunate enough to have DJ Kyle, who literally used to work with Prince, on our call here today as our DJ, as our resident DJ here for Aveda. So he's going to play some tunes for you guys while I blow dry, and then I'll see you guys when I'm flat ironing this, and then we'll go through and talk a little bit of what we're finding.
You ready?
Yeah, dude, man.
All right.
All right. Dude, I was into your music. Okay, if you guys have any questions, now is a great time.
Could you also use a paddle brush for the blowout?
I did not. I just used, but you totally can. I like the paddle. I find that it's a little flatter than I need for sort of wrap dry. But yeah, you totally can. Also very comforting for the client as well. Okay. So I like to just go through, and especially through the sides where I'm going to be doing some refining, I love for the hair to be ironed with a shape. So it's like I see these little like kinks in it, and when I take my iron to it, I just want to sort of add to the blow dry. So I don't want to like take away from the bevel, and I don't want to like create an artificial one. So as I roll the the flat iron, I'm just trying to like run it through the hair, so to speak. Okay? So I'm not like trying to clamp it too hard. It just needs a little bit of heat. And then just remember that the hair is really pliable at that point. So a good thing is when you just come down and you just take your comb to the hair, it'll kind of just like put it exactly where you need it to. So it doesn't have to be a lot of work, but what you don't want to do is, spend this time putting in the finish only to have it work against you. And if you iron the hair too straight, it actually works against you. And the hair, it might expose the line better, but you want to have like a little bevel, I feel. It just makes it look, to me, much more beautiful than if the hair just looks so straight. I think in my mind, I just always think of like a great haircut and healthy hair always has like body. Like I love straight hair. I even love flat hair, but I want it to like have a little bit of bounce and feels like it can move, right? So sometimes I think when you iron it, we might be overdoing it. So just think about just this,
Hey, Ricardo.
Yep.
What are your favorite finishing products for a cut like this?
Probably a bit of air control is all it's gonna need. I love control paste, and I can almost feel like I can add control paste to like almost anything, even if I'm not using it to sort of like texturize, to create a lot of texture in the hair. Sometimes I just use it because I like kind of the way it makes the hair feel fat, if that makes any sense. Like it kind of clumps it up a little bit. So that's always fun for me. What else? I'm going to take this, it's a little full for me here. So I'm just going to take my dryer. And it's like she's got way too much volume happening there. Yeah, I love like just hair control. I find I put more into the idea of like what goes in before we blow dry. I always find I'm lighter on like finishing products, and I generally go a little heavier on like the pre and more the setup. Just because I love it just being shiny and a little smooth infusion would probably be my second kind of choice there. How about I ask you, whoever asked that question, what would you use? That's always a good one. I'm not a good painter or anything, but I like painting like airbrushing toys. And when I think about, there's a certain brand of paint called Tamaya paints, and they're a little bit more expensive and they're really good. And they have like these specific reds and blues. And when I think about, just the use of product, I think of it in that same sort of way. It's so like personal. Like, what do you like? What would you like to see? How would you like to see this finished for your guest. And I don't think it's always about like more loads. I think it's about having something great to dress up. Mm-hmm.
Ricardo,
Yes.
can you explain why the heavier side of the part sometimes seems longer in the front?
It always is longer. It's not, it seems, it absolutely is longer. I'm going to show it to you in 1 second here. Let's finish up this back. It absolutely is longer, and that's a fantastic question. So when you do balance it, which you can, you kind of have to be aware that you've officially kind of made the haircut crooked. Now, the beauty in a side parting is to have one slight side where the parting is to drop a little bit longer, because it essentially is further on your head. So if you think about like the distance that this hair has to travel in order to reach that guy, it's going to be longer. And so if you balance and connect it with both your sides, then yeah, you're going to have that one side that drops down just a little bit. As you refine your line and also checking the parting through, it helps to minimize that contour. You can also help to minimize it by bringing the parting closer to the middle so that it doesn't look so asymmetric. But that's actually part of the beauty of having a side parting. And even when I'm like going to do a bob on someone and they have a side parting, I kind of go, oh, this is like the beautiful part about it. If it looks like you just left a piece along there, you got to kind of make sure, you know, that there's balance on both sides. But yeah, that does happen. And it's actually kind of correct. So sometimes I see like news anchors and stuff, and their haircuts are symmetric with partings. But if you kind of look at them, you'll see that they're not straight as you go further back. So because the one side has more hair on the parting, the deeper the parting goes, the sort of more, you know, or the longer that one side ends up looking. I don't want to say it's asymmetric, because it's not. It's just, you know, part of that look is the deep side parting.
Then regarding products, we've got an answer to your question.
Oh, great.
Thickening paste and air control.
Why thickening paste? That's a good one.
For a more textured look.
Oh, nice. I love thickening paste. I feel like control paste is like the weaker brother. Okay. So let's just finish these last ones. And my favorite part of the cut is always in the final stages, because you can do very little and really drastically change, you know, the whole haircut. So I love, to me, that's like the magic part, only what I've fallen in love with when it comes to hair cutting. Okay, so I think we're all ironed out. Let's just get that parting back where it was. Something about right there. And she's got a little cowlick here. All right. So before we do anything, we're just gonna cross-check some of this front. So remember, this is a whole triangular shape here, right? So what we're gonna do is we're just gonna come in, just start off, and I'm just gonna drop that outline away. Let's see if you guys can see this. We're not gonna texturize, we're just gonna pull to the end of the shape, and all we're gonna do is just dust away. If we see anything that needs dusting, we're gonna lift that. This is just gonna help to lighten shape up. Okay, we're not changing anything at this point. Okay. So once we've done that, essentially what that has done is it's kind of created not a shorter guideline or anything, but you can actually see, you know, as you now take your sections back, you can now start to see the little corners. So any inconsistent elevation, we now come back in and we're kind of looking to connect or make sure nothing lives in between these two areas, right? So we go through the top, checking that off, and then we go through the bottom, and I'm very happy with the way my graduation has come out. Okay, and then you can see through the back area, I can even just make it even more precise. I'm just gonna dust this area away. Okay. So I like being able to see that contour there, right? So now we'll come through just the opposite side, and you can do this after you do the outline, but you'll find that you end up having, again, to kind of recut essentially what you've already cut. Okay? And again, guys, all we're doing here is dusting. So you pull it to the very end of the shape. So you just keep going, and you get right to the end. And then all you do is just dust. Now you can lift. And again, just taking small amounts away. Okay, and then we'll just come into the bottom portion here. And we want to make sure there's no corners living in between. So it's just flawless, tight. Okay. Hope you guys get itchy to do one of these after. All right. Okay. So I'm actually switching shears now. These are Van Michael scissors. They're really sharp. They're new. All right, so let's get right into our outline here. Okay, and so what I want to do is I'm just going to keep a point in the back area, and we're just going to kind of curve that line coming into where we were shorter, and then let's just pass through that just one more time. All right. Closer. Now, we're just gonna take, that's a lot of hair to deal with. Right. So this is all open to cutting here. And really just gonna come across. Okay, so we got a good first pass at that line. And then let's just come in. So there's little bits to cut, okay. So we're just gonna continue and move right into that front. And now that we've got a clearer idea of where our length is, I'm just gonna lift that and now just help to take some of the length away. So she's not so so this is still putting graduation into the line, and then we come back through. Okay. And this is all just refining it. Now we'll come back. We can see a clear finish to our line. We could approach this in a couple different places. We can also come underneath like so, and really just use the scissor as a pencil at this point. All right, so just going to minimize some of the length. It is the funnest thing to do, lines. Okay. Nice shape happening in the back. Okay. Let's again minimize some of the length happening through the front. So we're just going to pull our comb just again to help to control. And just kind of bring that up. All right. And then I'm just going to tilt that off to the side. Now, just actually, I'm going to come just almost like from the underneath. And it just is about cleaning the line, sort of like from the inside there as you do it. Okay? So we just tilt just off to the side. Just going to come in and just have to minimize the angle there. Okay. Any other questions right now, Kyle?
No questions, but we have a comment. You're a magician.
Thank you.
Loving this. Oh, we do have a question
I'm
in
gonna disappear in like 20 minutes. Watch.
we do have a question. Do you have any tips on detailing and texturizing techniques?
Yeah, let me. I mean, you know, the thing about like point cutting with something like this is just to kind of go back in to the shape as it exists. You know, you can come in. I like to point cut through the top, and I prefer sort of slicing, you know, through the bottom. I don't do like crazy amounts of texturizing. I find that like with slicing and point cutting, you're kind of maxing out pretty much what the hair I think can handle. Otherwise, I just like to just sort of pick up like a razor and go at it that way. But I think it's so personal. So my tips are always, you know, master your blade as much as you can. You know, when you're cutting lines, your scissor just turns into a pencil, and there's always something else to cut. Okay, and let's go ahead and do a little bit on
What
the
kind of razor do you use, Ricardo?
I use a feather plie. So it's one without a guard. I like my razor.
The one you like to terrorize me backstage without the guard.
What's that?
The one that freaks me out whenever we're backstage together.
Oh, right. Just so you guys know, Kyle loves hanging out backstage with me.
It's been a long time.
Well, it has been a long time. We need to get back to some shows. Okay, so now I've got a point in the back area. So I'm going to literally just start from that point, and then we're just going to shoot upwards, right? So actually, this side always feels easier to sort of cut a line. So should have started here because it will look cooler. So we start right in the back. You know, we can just hold our blades, and then another good tip for whoever had asked that. It's like as you're cutting your lines, you tilting the head because you kind of want your blade to come under this way as you cut, rather than that or too flat. And as we cut, what happens is the hair kind of rolls under ever so slightly, and it makes your line look actually cleaner. Okay, so the other thing is as I come in, I'm always pulling the blade back. So whatever cut I get, you know, it's really intentional. I don't kind of go in nibbling, I kind of will go for it. And then each time you do it, you're just pulling those blades back, and you'll get a much, much more precise line. And of course, Van Michael's sharp scissors here. Shout out to the Van guys. They just returned back to work, I believe. All right. And
Ricardo,
yep.
Do you know what graduation fits best on other textures like fine, medium, or coarse?
It fits on all textures of hair, really. It's just a matter of like the right shape for the right client. I love it on curly hair. I love it on straight hair. I'm not a fan of coarse, thick hair, but it does work really well, you know, as a way of like controlling, you know, controlling the weight that's on the shape there. So yeah, I think like graduations like salt, you know, it's so like invaluable for, you know, you can't like get rid of it. It's like taking a certain tool out of your toolbox. So I like it just as a technique, you know, whether I use it in like 2 sections in the back, or, you know, or just a couple panels through the sides. You know, it's just a great technique to master, and not only just this way of cutting, you know, but to really gain an understanding. You know, when you get a client that like thinks you're a magician, the idea of what's happening there is you've physically been able to like change either their face or their hair, or you've mechanically been able to do something that no one else has been able to do. So, you know, all those things for me, the real like magic that I've experienced in haircutting and the ability to change people has always come from like just a deep understanding of what you can do with your techniques. And to kind of like when you learn something, you know, not to just take it as is, but to kind of go right. Like I don't like teaching people like tricks, twist it this way, then do this, weave your scissors in and out. I just like it to just for people to gain a good understanding of what we do day in and day out, and for people just to kind of understand how easy it is. All right, any more questions as I finish up here?
Yep. With textured hair, do you blow it out straight before cutting the graduated bob?
If they're gonna wear it straight, and I would really like have that conversation with the client, because you're not gonna have a great version either way. So if it looks great curly and then you have to straighten it to make it look good straight, it's gonna look good straight, it's not gonna look great curly. So if she wears it curly, even textured, the only time I straighten is when someone's like has wavy hair and their hair goes inconsistent. Then I would straighten it and cut it like it was like this, and then allow the texture to come in and do what it needs to do. But if it's curly hair, I would prefer not to do it. And I'll also tell my client that, and I would avoid trying to put in a lot of like shorter pieces, or, you know, like layering and stuff like that, because it could just make it really a bit of a problem. This is a good haircut for people who like to wear it both ways, because essentially there's length in there that they can blow dry, right? So that's always a good thing there. And there's nothing like short and layered. I think for curly, you just try to keep it a little longer. Any other questions?
That's it right now.
All right. right.
Actually, I can answer this next one. Carol's asking this, will this be aired again this week? We are putting all the videos up on PurePro, so you'll be able to check out this video in about 48 hours on the PurePro site. You just go to resources, type in Ricardo's name, and you can see this class and all of the other ones.
So we're just gonna, again, just modify just a little bit more. All right. Okay, I'm just fiddling now, as we all do. All right, I'm gonna add a little control force. I'm just gonna comb that out. Let's lose. Tell you, I'm using you guys as my monitor, which is like my mirror. It's the closest thing we have. I hope you guys enjoyed and got something out of our session today. And that you join me again next week, because we always have something new and different to share. And just want to say thank you to all of you guys hanging in there, keeping everybody inspired. Okay. This is slowly, I think, coming to an end, and it's been wonderful. So this is just a little smoothing infusion, and here's our little shape. Okay. All right, I could always see another hair. So they're cool, they're classic shapes. So the other side, super classic, but they can be a lot of fun as well. And you can mix it up, and again, if you did do any sort of texturizing, it's a great one, because I think after a bob, really what you're able to do with most of your haircuts, they end up kind of, turning into some sort of version of a graduated bob. All right. Let's just do something more classical. Guys, it's been a pleasure. I hope you guys have a wonderful night. And I hope to see you guys in the next session. All right, guys, peace out. Take care.